Radio Detox is back with a guest who needs no introduction, but we will give the introduction. Anyway, you know Frank Corva from being a White House correspondent, working with Bitcoin Magazine, working with Forbes, and I think you wrote one of the first really great articles about music in Bitcoin and Nostr and what artists were doing for Forbes. So I welcome to Radio Detox Frank Corva, one of our favorite journalists in this space. How are you, Frank?
Doing well. Thank you so much for having me on. Much appreciated. And thank you for the kind introduction.
Oh, I'm so glad to have you. You know, we've been reading you for a while, and you did. I guess you're still involved with Bitcoin Magazine, but you kind of left. I think to kind of I don't know. I did I recall something maybe about burnout, or I think you're just moving on to something else.
A little bit tired. I was probably doing a little bit too much overall between traveling back and forth to DC almost every other week and then
Mhm.
plus international travel and the conferences we do and everything else. It was probably all a little bit too much, but also hit a point. I don't know. I just tend to listen to my body when I get to points where it just seems like there's a moment now where it feels like it's time to move on. It took me a while to get to that point because obviously, like, who in a billion years would have ever thought Bitcoin Magazine would have a White House correspondent, much less would that be me. Just a very sort of surreal situation. So I think part of it is just like it took me a minute to fully say, like, am I really going to move on from this? And it's hard. Some days I wonder if I made the right decisions. I mean, I left off on good terms with Bitcoin Magazine. So when people come to me with some news to break, I'll happily do it for them. I do have to say, though, it has been nice to take a break from the news cycle and even politics. I'm not a big political person, and it's nice to sort of step back from that a little bit.
I've been there. I left TV in 2021. It's like I
Mm,
literally got sick and couldn't do it anymore, and it was
yeah.
I'd had COVID and I was extremely ill. I had undiagnosed asthma, and it was the perfect storm where it was like, I don't think I can go back to the newsroom. And at the time, you know, we were very shorthanded because of the pandemic, and so I was often producing two news shows a night, and it was too much. And so
Yeah.
I get that. And news is very draining. I don't think people realize what a haul that is on a 24-hour news cycle. Seems like it's almost a 15-minute news cycle sometimes. And the White House that is a whole other level. That is not a Tea Party cakewalk fun. I have a friend who did the White House correspondent thing as well, my friend Jamie, and it did not sound fun. It did not. It's obviously a great career peak, and you did it
Right.
well.
Thank
And
you.
did you learn anything from having to be, at the White House and
Yeah,
reporting on that?
I want to shout out the staff there, and not that I, like that they're listening to all my podcasts or something, but I do want to mention it because there was, we are at this really interesting moment where, what you're doing as a podcaster or what we're doing as independent creators, whether you like or dislike the Trump administration, and I'm sure many people listening have mixed feelings at best. He tends to be polarizing, and I think he knows that. So I'm not saying anything sort of out of the ordinary here. But I will say one thing they did really, really well was so for Trump's first 100 days, they only had non-mainstream media come to the White House. So I was next to some guy who was like running a podcast in Pennsylvania as I'm sitting in a room with like Howard Lutnick and Bo Hines interviewing them. And whether you like or dislike the administration, that was, I think, a very, very smart move. The signaling to sort of the world out there, we understand that the media landscape is changing, so we're going to invite people in. Just very, very smart. And I think, I'm not going to get political here, but it's something that I hope Democrats are taking note of. I think with Democrats, there tends to be a little bit more of like an ivory tower thing. Like, well, the specialists are here and only these people from the Wall Street Journal or Bloomberg or whoever could possibly know what they're talking about. And that wasn't so much the vibe with the administration. So I will say from like as a DIY enthusiast, as a believer in
Yeah.
like, if you want to do something, just do it. And then you could potentially even get invited to the White House. There is something very, very cool about that. Again, whether you like Trump or don't like Trump. So that part was great. But even there was a moment, I'd gone to the press room for a few different things, but there was a moment where Carolyn Levitt did call on me and I asked about the de minimis exemption. And even in that moment, that seat that I was sitting in was specifically designated for new media. And that was literally in the front of the press room. So it's like, there really is something sort of interesting to take note of there in terms of like, yeah, we're going to give some space to this. And I don't have a history as like a political correspondent. So it wasn't like they were like, oh, Frank seems to be like a MAGA enthusiast or something. We'll just sit him in the front. Like, there's no evidence of that in anything I've ever written.
Mhm.
It just was a genuine opportunity to sort of have some different new media in the room. Granted, David Bailey, was obviously involved in some fundraising for Trump and the administration. So there was, like, I guess, some
Mhm.
love in that regard, but nobody was screening my questions. Nobody was telling me to ask pro-Trump questions. And that part of it, I think, having played the long game as a writer and as someone doing media and tried to sort of remain sort of integral and to not get too political and to not cut corners and to just do bombastic things to get more likes and clicks. It felt good to have that opportunity to actually be in such a place
Mhm.
and to have done it in a way that felt integral to who I am.
Yeah, and I appreciate that. I appreciate that the Trump administration did that because there is an ivory tower. There is an old guard to
Yes.
journalism. There is, having worked in it, there are a lot of people who stick around and they linger when I think new blood could be brought in, and certainly people with new perspectives. And I think the old guard is protected. I've seen younger, more diverse people come into journalism who probably do a better job than the old guard. Who the award winning, they're doing great stories. They're breaking great stories, and the old guard still remains. And it's like, well, the old guard doesn't have, without naming any names, the old guard doesn't have all of these, awards. They're not, capturing certain headlines, but they're still there, like tenured professors. And it gets stale, and we
Same
live in
vibe.
a
Totally.
yeah, we live in a time where I don't think we can afford to do that anymore if we want to hold on to our democracy. We really need to get new life
Agreed.
in, not just in journalism, but in politics as well. We need to, and not to be like ageist and mean about a certain generation, but I think the writing is on the wall, and we are seeing things change, like Barry Weiss taking over CBS
CBS, right?
after
Yeah,
the
it's exciting.
success with the Free Press. And that's certainly an incendiary situation if you follow the headlines about that. And I enjoy reading the Free Press and actually pay for it. And good journalism should be paid for, and I think original reporting should be paid for. If we like that, we need to put our money into it. And it's like $10 a month for me to pay for the Free Press, and it's on Substack. That's one way of paying for quality journalism. I would love to see more journalists get onto Nostr like yourself.
Be fantastic. I've been there. I've been doing some stuff. I have to say, the one thing that's hard. So I write a Substack each week, and I've done so. That's how I got into Bitcoin, or started putting content out 5 years ago now. Uh,
Mhm.
Part of the reason I write the Substack, and I have transferred some of the pieces over. I think two of them from Substack through Highlighter. I think I've used as a Nostr client. It's not great yet. The UX for Highlighter isn't perfect. There's usually a bunch of glitches that I have to deal with as I do it. That's not an excuse. Don't get me wrong. It's just a matter of, like,
What's the
sometimes
truth
it's just what
about
it is.
Nostr?
But that's the opportunity, right? We're at that point where it feels very much like early internet, like we're remaking the internet with Nostr, which I love. Don't get me wrong. Some of it is just sort of like, okay, I did this post today here and then here and then here. Now do I want to, like, do all this again on Highlighter? Just laziness on my part. Don't get me wrong. Or just like,
That's
I'm
tedious.
tired. Tedious, exactly. That's the word. It's tedious sometimes, but I think that the opportunity there, I usually get zapped for it. When I do provide value there, I always, like, when I covered the samurai stuff and things like that, I would make, tons of sats doing stuff like this. And it felt like I don't see how people don't see that opportunity, whether you're an artist or whether you're a journalist or whatever. The only thing I would say is I've had this conversation with a lot of people who have bigger X handles, and I think Nostr has maybe 40, 50,000 active weekly users, maybe more
Yeah,
at this point.
something around there, daily or
Yeah,
weekly. It's hard to tell, I think, because of
yeah.
relays, but that's another story.
Totally. But I think part of it is just simply reach. It's once that
Mhm.
reach becomes bigger and bigger and more people come to Nostr, I think no doubt it will get more people will use it. I think right now also difficulty of user interface. I think Primal is probably the best. I think DOM is also quite good. But again, like I said, with Highlighter, I've done stuff and there's glitches and I have to go back and fix stuff and this and that. I'm happy. I think in a year, 2, 3, all of this stuff
Yeah.
will be much, much better. So right now I say to people, like, deal with some of the pain. Even if you're just cross posting, you post something on X, there's no harm in posting it on Nostr as well.
Mhm.
But I think right now it's sort of network effects that we're battling with. How do we develop network effects
Yeah.
on Nostr and versus
That's the
X and
thing we're missing is the network effect right now, and bringing people into Nostr, retaining them, and getting them to kind of to onboard and get that wallet and find that content that you're like, great, I found this great reporter, Frank Corva, and he's covering the samurai trial, and I'm very into this news story, and I must follow this, and I must sign the petition. I need to know everything about it, and I'm so appreciative of Frank. Frank, here's 450 sats because I read you today. Like that's where
great.
we'll get. It could be 21
Yeah,
sats, could be 2100 sats. I love seeing
that's right.
people like post content, whatever it is, and somebody says, "Oh, here you go. Here's 21,000 sats," and it's like this. The systems were the system. I guess we don't have a system per se, but
The
you know,
protocol, the
the
protocol is
protocol is
working. Yeah,
working. We're able to support one another in our own new value for value Bitcoin circular economy. It's the biggest
yep,
Bitcoin circular economy in the world. Is
yep.
Nostr.
Yeah, actually, I don't know if I coined that, but I published that piece for Bitcoin Magazine. It was because
Mhm.
I'm sort of envious of the Bitcoin circular economies, which I cover a lot for Forbes. I've been to 5 of them, 4 of them in Africa and 1 in Latin America. And, there's a sort of because of the gray area that exists there, nobody's really going after people for like capital gains because they're spending Bitcoin or something like that.
Mhm.
I think in the United States it's going to be different, especially for businesses that are accepting it with block. We need the de minimis exemption because these businesses, well, not that the businesses are spending it, but for the average person who's maybe using Cash App to spend it, who's going to have to report on that Bitcoin disappearing from their wallet,
Mhm.
it's a real issue. I think with Nostr, I don't think any of us are raking in like tens of thousands of dollars with it. So I don't think we're at any sort of, nor spending tens of thousands of dollars. So I don't think we're in any sort of danger there. Yeah, but it feels like the one place where globally, if somebody does something that's interesting, provides value, etc., where you could just very, very quickly tap on a button, somebody's getting zapped for what they did. That's the way I want to see Bitcoin work. That's just the way we want value to flow, the same way information flows. And Nostr, I think for people, I just onboarded a Japanese artist. I was a musician for many, many years, and I recorded a record in Japan, and she did the cover art for my record. And her husband and I went to grad school together. Yeah, and I onboarded her and just said like, look, you put all your stuff on Instagram, just like download Nostr build, put all your stuff here. Not download,
Mhm.
use Nostr build, put all your stuff
Mhm.
here on, just post your paintings here. And I think the first time she posted, she made, I don't know, maybe 20, $30 worth of Bitcoin, whatever that was at the time, tens of thousands of sats. And she was just like, okay, the hardest part with all of it,
Get it.
yeah, I think it's just the hurdle of what's a Nostr, what's a Bitcoin wallet, what's a this, what's a that. And
It's too much
the,
at once.
yeah,
That's unfamiliar.
100%. And I think people end up thinking it's more difficult than it is to get started. I've heard the
Mhm.
argument. I actually interviewed Will from Damas at PubKey a few months back, and he said something like, Primal isn't a Nostr client. And I don't even remember what his reason was, but he was saying because of the
Oh, I
way it's
remember
set
this.
up, yeah, and like the way the relays are set up, where they're not, or whatever it is, his argument was like, no, it's not a Nostr. I'm just like, dude, it's like I think about Primal. Think about Primal like Blink Wallet. You could argue that some people
Mhm.
say custodial Bitcoin isn't Bitcoin. It's still a good onboarding tool. Like if you want to move to Iris or Amethyst or some of these other Nostr clients, that's fine. Do that afterwards, but you still do need something that feels a little bit like the legacy system, which means like when you start an X account, it's not as glitchy. It's not glitchy at all. It's smooth, and I think Primal is the closest experience that we get to that right now.
I agree. They're people who are new to the space, they're not going to understand that there are a plethora of Bitcoin wallets, a plethora of Nostr apps. And I think Derek Ross and I recently discussed the argument of whether Primal is a Nostr app or not. I'm sure, Fiat Joff, the creator of Nostr, has his own viewpoint. And I think a few months ago, the argument that Will started was that Primal has some centralization to it. In order to operate, it has opted in for the high tech explanation I won't give. That's why I have Derek for soapbox sessions. But that's I think we get lost in some of these weeds because we're all so close to Nostr and we're involved in building it and we're involved with the developers who are building it and we're testing things. And so we're contributing in some way. I think we get lost in the weeds where the general public hears this and goes, I don't know what that means, and that makes me feel stupid, so I'm not gonna care, and in fact, I'm probably gonna hate this because now it's made me feel stupid. And so I think that's one problem that we have, where we have really smart people building really smart things for other smart people. We've got to remember that the general user, the average mainstream person, it's February 2nd, it's Groundhog Day. So the mainstream people last night watched the Grammys. They're excited about the Super Bowl Sunday.
Right.
They're using Spotify. They're having their banks hit them up with push notifications right now that you can buy crypto in the app, whippy doo.
Right.
And now that the word crypto is starting to become a thing, I have my
Yeah.
normie friends are like, "Oh my god, you're in crypto? Oh my god, I just bought so much XRP." And I'm just like, "Oh," and that's the sticky situation where we're in, where people are starting to get curious and wake up, and then they might pop into Nostr and go, "Oh my god, what is this? Okay, but my crypto thing that I'm getting push notifications for on my phone, which is being marketed to me well in a way that makes sense. That's waking me up. Whereas the Nostra crowd is just difficult and complicated. And I'm going to have a whole conversation, or I'm going to want somebody to show me how to do something. Like, we just need to kind of understand where we are and make it more
Totally.
simple and digestible and say, okay, first of all, just open a Nostr account, which is not really technically correct, but it is a way to
Yeah.
parlay it to normies and say, "Hey, just get a Nostr thing. Get it, open it, now you're on Nostr. Boom." And then we'll go to the next step, because once people see zapping and experience zapping, I find that they can't wait to zap other people. They don't get excited about
Yeah.
receiving the money. They get excited about sharing it with other people. I don't know if you've seen the same thing.
Yeah, I think both. It's actually funny. The person who I've probably seen the most excited about this is Leopoldo Lopez, who was one of the Venezuelan
Yeah.
opposition leaders. Yeah, I did an interview with him at Pub Kia Fireside Chat, and um, it was really interesting. He was just like he was showing the audience after the stream had ended, like how to zap, and like most people there probably knew how to do that already. But I ended up teaching some other Venezuelan activists how to do it, and he's just like blown away by it. And I was just like, man, this guy. I lived in Venezuela under Chavez, so I very much followed
Mm.
Leopoldo Lopez when he was put under house arrest and imprisoned and all this stuff. And I'm like,
Mm.
if I ever thought that this was the way I would meet this guy, like at a Bitcoin bar and he's thrilled about zapping, like it was just kind of a surreal experience. But I think that again, it's like that ability to transfer money so easily without KYC, without whatever, just literally like, I like this thing done.
Mhm.
It's a quote Andreas Antonopoulos. I think he said Bitcoin is better experienced than explained. And I think Nostr is the
Yes.
same thing. It's a similar idea.
How long ago did you meet Leopoldo Lopez?
Oof, it was last year sometime. I've done 2 chats with him, one at an HRF event and one at PubKey since, and we've been in touch. So it was about a year ago or so.
I'm curious because I haven't met him, but Soapbox, which is my full time job, our team was at the HRF AI Hack for Freedom, and we were paired with him. And so we
Awesome.
built an app that's now called Agora. Agora.spot is the if somebody wants to go check it out and test it right now. We're working on the beta. And this is something that Leopoldo Lopez and the World Liberty Congress were working on, because Twitter's banned in Venezuela, and they want a way to bring their community together, organize, do some community challenges, and do the zaps. And the zaps mean a lot more in Venezuela than they do here where I'm at in Phoenix, Arizona, where people are like,
Totally.
Bitcoin, what is it? Like, my niece one day was, "What is the Bitcoin stuff? Can you show me the Bitcoin stuff?" And because she got some roundups for her coffee purchases and Cash App, and
Oh,
so
cool.
she became curious, and she's like, "Okay, yeah, whatever," and kind of moved on. But the folks in Venezuela, that's transformative, and that's, to me, an awe-inspiring story of, it may not mean much to Heather and Frank, it may not buy a coffee for you or I, but it means so much to somebody else in another part of the world.
Yeah. I think that that's broadly speaking kind of the magic of Bitcoin. It's like I'm going to be restarting a podcast I was doing for a bit before I started at Bitcoin Magazine, where I was mostly interviewing people from mostly Africa, Latin America, Southeast Asia, what gets termed the global South, and also activists, specifically sort of having those conversations in places where I think Bitcoin is either most beneficial or most needed. Yeah, I just think that and I was thinking about it as I restarted it, and I'm like, I don't want to manage the social media for it. I don't want to do this. And I was just like, oh, like, I could probably hire someone from like Bitcoin Dada program
Mhm.
I teach in for African women who are learning about Bitcoin at a rate that feels good to them, that's worth their time, maybe in Kenya, or if they're getting their, if they're just sort of looking to get their feet wet, far more than if I were to go somewhere here in the States and say I'm going to pay, however much you have to pay. And I would rather the money go to someone who feels excited to become a part of the Bitcoin ecosystem, who has this opportunity strictly because of the internet, strictly because of Bitcoin, and strictly because of things like Nostr. So I feel like that's the magic of what Bitcoin is. And I say this as someone, I've worked for the United Nations. I taught immigrants for 12 years. I was everything from a college lecturer who taught non-native English speakers to an actual ESL teacher in New York public schools.
Mhm.
I've lived in Venezuela, I've lived in Ghana, I've lived in Namibia. So I've seen a lot of programs that are designed to help people, and they do on some level, but I've never seen anything catalyze sustainable change like this combination of this new technology, the freedom tech stack on the internet.
Mhm.
And I think the biggest thing that's most beautiful about it is like when you live I've lived and worked in really poor communities, both here in New York and abroad. People who don't have as much financial opportunity or are of lower socioeconomic status are actually the most thrifty and frugal. So my thesis kind of is like, what happens if you sort of infuse that situation, someone who's willing to like take on opportunities that come their way, if you infuse that with these opportunities plus, the best money we've ever seen as a human species, it's like what starts to happen? They very, very quickly you will have people take this opportunity and run with it. The thing with your niece, much like my nieces and nephews and everything else, is I don't even say this with any sort of condescending tone. It's just reality. We're steeped in such privilege here that you don't even
Yes.
realize why, you would need something like Bitcoin. And people sometimes ask me, like, why do you focus outside of the political stuff I was doing? Like, why do you focus on Africa, Latin America? Why don't you do stuff here? It's because people get it much more quickly when there's a need for it. I can explain it to someone down the street from me, but their Venmo works fine. They don't,
Mhm.
dollars, as much as they've been hurt, inflation has hurt people. There's still not enough pain for people, the average person, to go and just make
Mhm.
this change. So it's like, it's easier. If you're going to sort of spread the message, you want to spread it in a place where you feel like it's going to be received. So to me,
Yeah.
it's just easier to do that in places that have historically been disenfranchised because people get the solution much more quickly.
You were built for this, a lot like I was. I worked in social work. You were a
Mm,
teacher. I
yeah,
worked in the addiction field and social work, and so I
me too.
worked in
Yeah.
detox, jail, the courthouse, probation. Worked with folks on their worst day. People walking in a detox, they've got nothing. There's no money. They don't even have an ID, and they just want to get off meth or booze or whatever. And their lives are in disarray. It's only up from there. And then you realize that maybe someone's done some time and therefore they are a US citizen but a felon and unbanked, and watching people get paid with a check and then going, well, I can't put this in a bank, I've got to go stand in line at the local check cashing center, and then I get cash or some cashier's checks. I've literally watched newly sober addicts save their value, save their money in cashier's checks because
Mm,
they didn't want to have the temptation of having cash on hand. You can trade a cashier's check for a rock of cocaine. Yes. Obviously,
right.
I've seen that happen. I've seen people trade their EBT card, their SS, like their social security. Like I've seen people do that as well. But when people start to get on the straight and narrow, it's like, how do I remove the temptation? And also, I'm unbanked, which makes it a payroll check kind of, it's difficult. You get the payroll check and you've got to hang on to this, this proof of work that they have in order to obtain the next thing to maybe, someday get a place to live. They're not at a place where they need those payroll checks to get loans yet. They just need a
Right.
place to live and a proof of a job and a payroll check. And so I think when you've been there and you've watched people try to function in that world where they don't have the same privileges as the masses, it makes you kind of built for this work where you go, okay, I know there are use cases for Bitcoin in my country, but me going to talk to all the social workers that I used to work with at the mental health crisis center and the detox, they're not going to bite into Bitcoin as an idea yet until they see it help their clients. And I
Right.
don't think we're there yet. But yeah, you go to the global south and you will see it. But I think you have a unique story, of just like how you are or how you were built for this. Like you didn't just start out as a correspondent for the White House. You have
No.
seen you've seen these poor neighborhoods like I have, and how people are just kind of surviving, and people are hand to mouth, and maybe not even paycheck to paycheck. Certainly there is a check every month for a good segment of society, but it's certainly not enough either. There's no saving money. And I've also seen people on Social Security who are disabled and they're getting that disability income. They will get credit cards. And,
Right.
it's like they can't afford to have a credit card. Like they can't afford to have interest on, an emergency purchase. And before you know it,
Right.
they're buried in debt. And there's just so many clues to the financial system not working. Do you want to say a little bit more about your background and how you arrived to where you are? Because I know you've been a Bitcoiner for 8 years.
Yeah, 8 years now. Yeah, yeah. I think everything. So I have most of my clinical social work degree done. I did
Hmm.
33 of the 60 credits at Hunter here in the city, and I worked with people in supportive housing, active drug users in supportive housing. I counseled Holocaust survivors for a while, and in
Wow.
some of my training, and I've seen that plus just the work I did before that. Like I worked developing a trade school in rural Ghana with the Ministry of Education and UNICEF in Namibia, and then taught in a barrio, like a lower income neighborhood in Venezuela. So I've seen a bunch of stuff up close where it feels hopeless in terms of like, okay, what's the broader solution to this scenario if there is one? Yeah, it's I don't right now. The problem with Bitcoin, I would say part of it is difficulty of use, and the fact that one of the things that I've learned from documenting a lot of the work in the circular economies is that you need someone in these communities that's very, very, that one has a reputation in the community already as a community organizer or an educator or something where they're
Yeah.
trusted. So like Kofi and Bitcoin Dua in Ghana, Herman Vivier and Bitcoin Akazi, Mike Peterson and Chimbera in Bitcoin Beach. You need people who aren't just there for the opportunity of getting a grant from Jack Dorsey or Blockstream or
Yeah.
something. They need to they need to have been trying to solve issues in that community for a while. Like Kofi in Bitcoin Dua has been a community leader for 20 years, and he's probably one of the best Bitcoin circular economy
Wow.
leaders in the world, in my humble opinion. I've been to Bitcoin Dua. I was there the day they opened the doors to the education center, and I just wrote a piece on Forbes for how far they've come. And it's
Cool.
mind boggling. But yeah, just people, you have to have that level of understanding of like what the pain points are for people,
Hmm.
how education is going to work, because it's not only I say this a lot. I teach in the Bitcoin Dada program, which is a program for African women who want to learn about Bitcoin, and I
Love that
speak with
one.
the yeah, it's a great program. Lorraine Marcel, who started that program, I speak with her a lot, and I try to highlight whatever work she's doing. Just wrote a piece on a new program she started for female developers called Dada Devs. And because what you're dealing with when you deal with Bitcoin, it's not just the education about how to use a wallet. You're discussing probably one of the most personal matters people deal with, which is money. And there's
Hmm.
shame associated with money and not having enough money or not understanding money, not being able to pay your bills, being, in East Africa, where a lot of the women from Bitcoin Dada are from, you can't inherit property as a woman. There are so many things that have to be addressed, and
Yeah.
to be the person addressing them it's not just cognitively difficult, it's emotionally insanely difficult. I actually can't do that anymore. People have asked me to dedicate more of my time to that. I burnt out of when I did both teaching and social work,
It's
so I
draining.
can't.
Yeah.
Yeah, I
You can't do both. Like I did journalism and social work at the same time and burnt out badly.
yeah, it's just too much. And I can tell those stories now, and I'll be honest. Part of the reason I stepped up back from the White House thing is, I looked at what was going on, and I very much believed in like a better regulatory environment, ideally fighting for de minimis exemptions, not putting privacy tech developers in jail, all this stuff. But then there was another part of me that was like, in my heart, I just felt this deep sense of like, okay, I'm covering something. I'm covering the most covered person in the world, Donald Trump, the most written about person in the world, while there are people around the world doing the real work with Bitcoin who are getting zero acknowledgement, very little acknowledgement for what they're doing. And so whether or not it makes me whether it pays my bills or not, having the headspace to acknowledge what some of these people are doing, because their work is very, very thankless in a lot of ways. I think all of us who have turned people onto Bitcoin, we very rarely get a thank you when the price goes up. We
Right.
oftentimes get the whole,
The
hey,
panic
what's
call
happening? Panic call. So
when it goes
it's like
down.
it's like being a parent or a teacher, in that like you're there, you have to be there when people really need something, but very rarely do the people acknowledge all the work you put into just whatever you've done into raising a child, helping a student get better at whatever you're helping them get better with. And so there are these people around the world, and it's not, these sorts of having these interviews, doing these interviews with people, writing these pieces, they don't get a lot of clicks. I had somebody the other day retweet me. I wrote a piece called Making Space for Female Bitcoin Developers, and it was about this program, Dada Devs. I had some guy, he was part of the irresponsibly long MicroStrategy group, which like, that was sort of like, I'm just leave it at that. And he was like, he retweeted it and was just like, we have to keep this woke nonsense out of Bitcoin or whatever. And I
Oh
was
my
just like,
God.
and
Because
I got a lot
supporting
of
women is so woke, right?
terrible, terrible, right? Not only that, you would want as many minds and perspectives looking at Bitcoin and Bitcoin projects as possible. Diversity
Works
is
for
a strength.
everybody.
Yeah.
You know, it's
And,
it's
and,
it's
and
there's such a problem in this space of, and I go through this a lot more than I mention of being a woman in this space and some of the things that I have come up against, and I will fortunately have a female boss, our CPO at Soapbox, MK Payne, and I can go to her. She is a feminist, and I can say, hey, I have had a time today, and
right.
she gets it because there are not a lot of female developers, and the ones who are do not want to be revealed as female because
Exactly.
you can get by for a while. I've known women who did it before they got doxxed as female. You can get
Right.
by for a while without admitting to the other developers that you are a woman, and you will be treated differently after they figure out that you are a woman. And that is just how it is. That is just
Yeah.
it sucks. And it's a male dominated field right now, software development, Bitcoin, and Nostr. The women have an uphill battle, and I will die on that
Yeah.
hill. And so I
Yeah.
appreciate you for covering it.
Yeah. And I think, it's like, it's hard because one of the things that happens is, I think as human beings, we see these like massive overcorrections in our psychology. So
Mhm.
like people look at Bitcoin as like this correction to wokeness. And I get that on some level.
Right.
I
It
do.
sounds
Like,
silly. Yeah.
well, I think like the wokeness thing. I was in academia. I was in some of these circles where there was like correct speak and incorrect speak, and if you brought up
Mhm.
something like Bitcoin, you'd be like, they would just giggle, like, look at this silly person over here. Like the government has everything under control. Like, and I get that.
Mhm.
I get the correction back to like, no, self sovereignty, and people should be empowered on a personal level, because this is not what goes on in those conversations. That's fine. But it doesn't mean that some of the things that might be associated with wokeness, maybe like equity or like acknowledging that women have a different experience than men in certain situations or in most situations, that doesn't mean that that needs to be part of the thing with Bitcoin. You ideally want this technology to be used by everybody. Therefore, you want everybody developing it. One of the quotes I didn't include in that piece, just because I didn't have space, we got a kind of like a word count limited Forbes, was from Satsi, who's part of the Bitcoin Dev Project. And
Yeah.
she said something like, you can very much tell when a product for women was designed by men, like an app for women was designed by men, and when it was
Yes.
designed by women. And I was just like, yeah, like I don't have that perspective. I will say this, like my immediate family is 3 younger sisters and my mother has 8 sisters. So I
Mhm.
was socialized by many a female and surrounded by many women. So I have a little bit of insight as to like where things like my sisters are not radical personalities. When they say something like they're being treated unfairly because they're a woman, they're not complaining. Like it's a genuine thing that people should be taking note of. But I think the
Mhm.
bigger thing with Bitcoin Dada and what Lorraine Marcella is doing with Dada devs is, if you don't look like people in a group, you're going to be far less prone to move into that space. It
Mhm.
was a credit, it was Amiti Utawar, one of the first female Bitcoin Core dev, or the first person that was surely a female who developed on Bitcoin Core. I'm saying that incorrectly, but I think you get my drift. In 2019, she began contributing. And I was at like a workshop she was giving on mental health and working in the Bitcoin space. And she brought that up. It's like if women don't see people who look like them, they're not going to come over here to work on this project. And I
Mhm.
know it sounds like almost woke of me, but I live in a place like New York because I actually enjoy diversity. And I'm not saying that to be, that's not a virtue signaling thing. Like I live
It's not a
in,
woke thing.
it's
It's
really
there are
not like,
places that are more diverse than others.
honestly, it's more than anything. Like I live in Queens. It's like Queens is, I think, the most diverse jurisdiction in all of the United States. And what I love about Queens is that you hardly know, like, it's so diverse that you hardly notice the differences. You go to the Vietnamese restaurant or the this, and it's everybody just doing their thing. But the bigger thing that people forget about diversity is, like, if you're if you're of a certain sex, gender, etc., or of a certain race, you probably have, well, not probably, you have a limited scope. You have a way that you view the world. That's through the religion you were raised in or the
Mhm.
culture you were raised in. The thing with diversity, I wrote a piece on this for Bitcoin Magazine. I took, it's a book called Bowling Alone. I took an idea from Bowling Alone. There is something to be noted with diversity. One of the things is that diversity tends to be really beneficial over the long term. In the short term, it makes people nervous. So humans are programmed with in-group and out-group bias, and they're like, who's this new person or who's this new whatever? But over time, once you start working together, you're just like, oh, that's just this person, or that's just like, I think once in a while, one of my good friends is dark-skinned Puerto Rican guy. Another one is a Korean American guy. I never think about them in terms of what their ethnic heritage is, because it's just like, that's just Vinny and that's just Jeremy sort of thing. And I think that that's the way diversity has to work. So there's this initial thing of like, what do these African women think they're doing developing on Bitcoin? Whereas 5 years from now, you're going to be grateful that they're here and not even necessarily thinking about the fact that they're African.
Exactly.
Ideally,
Yeah.
but yeah.
Like that's I've had a recent bad experience with men in the Bitcoin space to the point where I thought I was over it, and then the other night I went to a Venture Cafe here in downtown Phoenix, which is like a startup hub, an innovation hub, and I hadn't
Okay.
been there before, and so I went in and kind of did the wallflower thing for a minute and looked around the room because it's a networking thing. There's panels, there's it's like a business. It's not a Bitcoin thing at all. It's there's crypto people there or Bitcoin people there, but it's overall it's an everybody thing, and it's in downtown Phoenix, which is one of the most diverse cities in the world. We've got
Yeah.
5 million people here. We've got TSMC. We've got great employers. We're a good mix here, more than we were when I grew up here in the 90s, right?
Okay.
And I looked around the room and I saw a large group of men talking to men. And I was like, that's not for me. And so I looked around and went,
Yeah.
okay, where are the women? I want to talk to the women. And not only that, I want to talk to people who are younger than me, because at Soapbox, we have an AI product. And I know that the younger generation has an issue with AI.
Mm,
We know this. They have more than one issue, but they take issues with AI. And so I want to talk to younger people about it. People my
yeah.
age, I use AI constantly. The world I live in is a bubble where a lot of people are constantly not only using it, but developing with it. We're doing AI
Right.
assisted coding. We're innovating. We're making more apps bigger, better, faster than we ever could before. The space is moving, right? So the Nostr space is going to pick up. Even the Bitcoins, everything's accelerating, right? But I
Hmm.
wanted to find diverse perspectives. And I didn't want to just talk to a bunch of dudes. And in that moment, I was like, I am not healed from this bad experience recently because I do not want to talk to a single man in this room. And I ended up talking to the women. I ended up talking to a more diverse group of, if I talked to men, they were more diverse. But it was like just looking at the guys who, maybe reminded me of some of the men in the Bitcoin space. I was just like, I'm not ready for this right now. Like, and I ended up
Yeah.
meeting really cool people. And I think I met, the right people that I wanted to meet at this point in time. And I think there's no accident. So, sometimes things happen for a reason, but we do have a long way to go. And some of us do want to be welcoming in this space. And we don't want to be, I don't know, there's a male macho bravado in the space that I think
For
keeps
sure.
people out. And
Yes.
or maybe not so much keep people out or scare them off. It probably does, but it's not welcoming. And I think it's one of the reasons why Nostr hasn't grown because it's very male and the amount of women is small. That's
Yeah. It's
something
very
that
male
we,
and very technical, which is like the two things alone, those two things
yeah,
together is just going to drive the average user out. No question.
yeah,
Yeah.
it's going to drive some of the younger people out. It's going to drive the women away. So I think that's another problem in this space. I don't know if you have other opinions about, I ask every guest this: what does Nostr need in order for Nostr to succeed? What must happen?
I think it needs to feel more behind the scenes. So I'll kind of qualify that a little bit. When I use Nostr, I know I'm using Nostr. Like I'm like, okay, this is like the UX isn't great. And again, I know I get that that's that's how you know you're early to something, and that's actually a good thing in certain ways and everything else. That's fine. But like the way that Nostr is used within BitChat, and I couldn't even fully describe it, that kind of stuff where like BitChat just works, Nostr is being used on the back end, and I'm getting
Mhm.
privacy as a result. I'm getting decentralization as a result. So what I want to see, I actually quote tweeted someone yesterday who said like, I'm going to bring this up or quote whatever Nostr quote Nostr posted, but I think my biggest thing is sort of it needs to be the Nosterness of it
Yeah.
needs to still be abstracted away. And I don't
Uh-huh.
know how much that can happen without really bad trade-offs. Like, who was it that said? Yeah, it was a guy who said, "What other services does Nostr need?" I said, "What other services can we run through Nostr?"
Yeah.
That was my thought. So it's like, what existing apps, whatever it is, what can we, instead of having a centralized entity, corporation, whatever behind it, how can we put that through Nostr? And I think that that's the biggest thing, because right now when people think of Nostr, the first thing that comes to mind, at least for me and for most people who are relatively new to it, is decentralized social media or a Twitter clone, right? Or a Substack clone with highlighter. And that's fine. I think that's actually a great place to start. No question. I think it's fine. But I think it's hard for me to answer that question, one, because I'm not a super technical person. But I would just say, what are people using in sort of normie world, in traditional social media world or traditional app world, traditional software world? How can we make those things exist in Nostr without feeling like they're Nostr clients? That's
Yeah.
really it.
Make it more simple. We've tried to do that with Runster being one of my other projects, where we've over time made it less Bitcoinish, made it less
Okay.
Nostr-ish, because we
Yeah.
want normies to get on it and not be hung up by, well, what money do I receive for rewards, or what money does the charity receive that I choose to
Right.
receive my, that we want them not hung up on that. And we thought, well, like, it's we're fundamentally Bitcoiners and we're fundamentally Nostr people. That's how we met. The Wild Hustle and I were in the Nos Fabrica challenge last year, and he built this app and then onboarded me as like the, I don't know, de facto business development manager, marketing type. It's a startup, so you do all the jobs, and so we've over time like hidden the Nostr. It's a Nostr app, but you don't really see the NPub unless you go looking for it. And now
Yeah.
the next operating upgrade we'll have, the next release will be the Nostr stuff is not going to appear unless you're a heavy Nostr user. So if you're somebody who
Right.
signed up and got an NPub, the Wavelake integration's not going to appear for you, or the share to Nostr isn't going to appear for you unless the device you're on sees like, oh yeah, she's really on Nostr like every day, and we're gonna
Yeah.
pop up the Wavelake toggle for her. So that's kind of, we're sneaking it in there, and
That's great.
this is again AI assisted coding is how he's done this.
Awesome.
Because we realize there's kind of, it's an uphill battle to explain coin and Nostr, and we want to be a part of the adoption and the hyper Bitcoinization, but we know we're not there yet. People are not asking for that. What we are with Runster is a privacy focused anonymous fitness tracker. We're not monitoring your data. We're not taking it, selling it like Strava or like Nike Run Club. Like, you can finally be anonymous. If you want to share it, you can. It's everything's a choice, which is the cool thing about Nostr, is we can build things to the point where things are a choice. Like sharing about yourself, or sharing that you built an app or whatever, sharing that you did a workout, it is a choice. It's not something that's just done and you're farmed into it so somebody can make you the product and take your data.
Totally. Yeah, I think that's the beautiful thing. And I think the hard part about that, I think you have to make it normie friendly in terms of use, because the average person, I'll be really blunt with you, like when you talk about even privacy, but more than that, like censorship resistance, when you say that, the average person's response to that is still, well, what do you have to hide? And that's
Yep.
fine, because the average person is like waking up, going and doing their job, not doing anything illegal, not doing something that they feel they need to hide.
Average
Without
boring lives.
Yeah, it's like without realizing that who they are and everything they're doing is being harvested, all that data around them. Most people won't like that, but also won't do anything about it.
They
Meaning,
won't fight.
remember it was like 4 years ago. Remember that documentary on Netflix came out about like how Facebook is harvesting data? It's called, yeah, it was like a big thing. And I remember it being big because like my aunts were watching it. Like everybody was like, wait, that's what Facebook is doing. And it's like, and everybody I knew
Yeah,
from this world is
20
like,
years.
yes, of course, that's what Facebook is doing. Like, that's all Facebook is doing.
They want our
And so,
data to make money off of us. And stop, like, full stop. End story. Like, that's what they saw in us. That's what Zuckerberg saw in the people using Facebook. And now it is the most used social media app in the world. And
well,
that's a lot of data.
yeah, that was my point. It's like, who stopped using it because of that? How many, what percentage of people stopped using it
Nobody.
because of that?
Maybe
Almost
some.
zero. Almost
Some
zero.
some ideal people like us who are like, let's go find Nostr. And and I think when I just had my 3-year Nostr anniversary, and I don't think I really knew what I was getting into. I did, like
Sure.
I didn't know that it would be more privacy oriented. I just knew
Yeah.
that at the time I was working in social media marketing, and I was following the developments of Elon buying Twitter and all the alts that were coming up, and none of them lasted, but there was a lot of they were good ideas, okay, but they just didn't take off, and they were companies, they were not protocols like Nostr, and I was looking for the next Twitter because for the last, 20 years now, along came the next thing over and over again, and now we're in a point where we're not really seeing the next thing come along. It's just that I think
Yeah.
the ecosystem is established and people are kind of breaking off into their own communities now, and it's more of like small group oriented, or people are sharing social media content. Like, I might text a friend a video I see, but I may not feel compelled to post it on Twitter. Like, the going viral thing is not a thing anymore. Once in a while something breaks
Mm,
through. Like, about a week ago, Claudebot became the thing, and then it became Moltbot, and then it became OpenClaw, and then
yep.
Moltbook happened, and then it's Soapbox. We built Closter, the answer to Moltbook, and that was an example of something that I don't know went viral, and I don't know how, because women like myself, one of our users of Shakespeare, another non-technical woman like myself, we were marketed that video. We were fed that content on YouTube. Whereas, like, yeah, I
Mm,
watch a lot of Claude things, but I don't watch developer-oriented kind of AI things that,
interesting.
like, Claudebot was more technical. So, like, I kind of think that they paid for targeted ads, and like that's the only thing that I can think of in recent memory that went viral. But the old going
Mm.
viral thing, I think, is a thing of the past, because I think we fractured off into our own. We've socially reorganized due to a hatred of social media over the last few years.
I think that's true. I would say and I think what makes Twitter particularly horrendous right now, and I'll add a little caveat to this in the end, is the learning how to game the algorithm and the monetization. So, like, the all caps, this is happening with fire emoji, and like the two pictures, a picture of Michael Saylor and a Bitcoin logo, and you get a quadrillion retweets or whatever. Like, the gaming the algorithm to just like the most lowest common denominator sense. It's basically
Yeah.
offensive. Like, and I've said this to like Rizzo, my former boss, and he's like, it's like I'm not. It's not even like a matter of throwing shade. It's just like, dude, I'm not here for this. The opposite of that is that I think on some levels, sometimes the cream still rises, meaning when Lynn Alden posts something really smart and you're like, fuck,
Yeah,
like, Lynn's really fucking smart. Like, okay, cool. But
exactly.
that has become the exception to the rule. Like, that's that kind of stuff. It's now like some MAGA influencer with a red light siren
Yeah.
saying, "Oh, the left wants to do this to you," or the opposite.
It's like
Some
fear and
Republican,
loathing. It's just very
yeah,
incendiary always. It's the same thing we used to do in
yeah,
TV, where, like, one of the reasons I burned out on TV is because we would put a reporter out in the field for the day. For like 8 hours, this reporter would work on a great story that actually
right,
affected the maximum number of people in a community. It could have been a story
yeah,
about electricity bills or something. And then we'd be ready to go for, Fox Kansas News at 9 and house fire. Oh, here's an opportunity to have flashing lights and emotion and
wild,
sadness on screen, like, because somebody might have gotten hurt. And it's like, okay, that's one house on one block, and that does not affect the entire community like my power bill story does. My
right,
reporter worked on for 8 hours today. She ate her lunch while editing in the
right.
car. Like, but she's going to be usurped by flashing lights. Thanks.
Yeah,
Hate this. Like, let me get out of this.
it's a there's a little bit of that too with the White House stuff. Why I step back, like,
Mhm.
I looked at it and said, like, so I look at Bitcoin a lot like I look at guns in the United States, not, and follow me for a second, more that I just don't want the US government to infringe upon people's rights to use it. I don't need them to do
Mhm.
anything about it. So
Right.
when the White House would send me something like, hey, here's something that's happening. I'm like, I don't really care. Like, I don't care about this ETF or this. Like, I just don't want you infringing upon people's right to use this, so that we have the right to use Bitcoin. It's enshrined in the Constitution. And that doesn't really make for a great reporter, because all I'm really doing is playing defense. It's like it was like a small breakout session with a handful of reporters with me and Paul Atkins, the new chair of the SEC. And I don't cover crypto, so I don't care that you're going to use blockchain on the back of whatever you're going to use it on. So my question to him was, can you explain to me what wallets look like? Because, what do crypto wallets look like? Because in a world where you're trading stocks, I'm imagining you're not going to want these things to be traded in non-custodial wallets. So when you talk about blockchain being used, is that on the back end of like Fidelity or Charles Schwab, the existing systems, or are you talking about the ability to use a ledger or a Trezor or something that is a crypto wallet? And now what does that mean for your Bitcoin wallet? Are you going to try to sweep Bitcoin KYC AML into that? And even come close to acknowledging the question. He wouldn't even talk about it because it was, one, he probably doesn't know yet, but two,
Right.
this is all that matters to me. I don't care about the blockchain. I don't care if you're using Solana or proprietaries. I don't care about any of that stuff. And so part of the reason I stepped back was, one, the news cycle moves too fast and it's too much flashing lights stuff, like I said. And then when I do something like that, most other people, probably even including Bitcoin Magazine on some level, though I was never told to cover or not to cover something, I will give them complete props there. They were always let me do what I wanted to do, which I'm very grateful for. Even in the White House, David could have been much more heavy-handed in asking me to ask certain things and all that stuff, but he didn't.
Mhm.
But you end up kind of having to play the same game that everybody else is playing, because they're appealing to this base level of human emotion. There's a book. I've started to think about this differently. This is a little tangent, but I think it's interesting. Have you ever read a book called Power versus Force?
Oh, I think it's in the TBR from a long time. I don't think I actually read it. I've heard of it, though.
So this is one of 3 books that Jeff Booth has ever read twice. So let me just explain it from that perspective. Jeff Booth, I look up to Jeff a lot, and I think he's kind of my North Star as like what being a
Great.
good human being / Bitcoiner is. He told me at a event we were both at, he was like, oh, this is one of 3 books I've ever read twice. I was like, well, I got to start with that one, because if this was enough for you to read twice, like, I'm going to go and read it.
Mhm.
But so what it does is it quantifies the frequencies on which things exist, starting down with like 0 or closest to 0 is like guilt, shame, anger, like all these sort of things that keep us trapped in like a negative doom loop or whatever. And that goes between 0 and 200. And 85 to 90% of the species of human beings operate between 0 and 200. So they're stuck in this thing, and it's like a chicken or the egg thing, right? Because the news is now feeding into that, keeping them stuck in the doom loop of 200, of below 200. I love this. The thing that gets you above 200 in terms of frequencies is courage, which I think is beautiful. You have to have some level of courage. Then you start experiencing like love and blah, blah, blah. And then you get up to unconditional love and this and all these things. And then true enlightenment is like the Buddha or Jesus Christ or whatever, prophet or whatever. You don't have to believe in that, but I think you get my point.
Mhm.
It's, there's this thing where if you're working in media full time, if you're trying to make your job in it, you're probably going to have to be a part of that machine that keeps people in that 0 to 200 frequency sort of thing. And I just don't want to do that. And when I look at Jeff or even like Lynn Alden, they're coming at things, they're not doing lowest common denominator type stuff. They're actually making people think about much bigger things in a way that feels comprehensible to people. And to me, that should be the goal. So like, I haven't perfected it. I'm also not like I don't think my brain is as good as Lynn or Jeff, but I still look up to them and saying like, okay, like what do I want the world to be? And now how do I do that in a way that works when I'm transmitting this message to people, in a way that feels like people want to retweet it or reshare it on Nostr or zap it or whatever it is. And I think I hope more people, content creators, have that conversation with themselves, because I think, and I already see it happening a bit more on Nostr. When you switch over from the X app to Primal or to Damus or something to a Nostr client, you already get this feeling of like, that bullshit is not going to fly here. I'll give you a
Right.
perfect example. I love the person. He's a buddy of mine, the guy who runs the X handle for Bitcoin Magazine on Twitter. He grew that account from 500,000 people to 3.3 million or followers or whatever it is. And don't get me wrong, like I love being retweeted by that account. It was fantastic for distributing whatever message I was putting out. Not going to pretend I'm better than that. But I would always tell them with Nostr when they started the Bitcoin Magazine handle and stuff, I'm like, guys, you just can't do that shit here. Like you got to do like shit
It's got to
that
be different.
people, yeah, it's got to have real value. It can't just be like rocket emoji and flames and we're going to the moon. Like,
You have to be part of
and
the community too. You have
that's
to
it.
interact. You have to, because, you can put something on Twitter and nobody's going to respond, right? That's just the way it works now. But if you put something
Yeah,
on Nostr, someone is going to respond. And, there's a good chance
likely.
you might get a little drivel, but you might get some really intelligent responses too and have like a real discussion with other humans.
Yes.
And that's the difference between Bitcoin and Nostr. Is You can
Yeah.
you can be smart on Nostr. You don't have to be
Twitter,
lowbrow.
X and Nostr. I think you said Bitcoin and Nostr.
Okay, yeah,
Yeah.
there you go. There,
Yeah.
that's the journalist in you. I love it that you're correct me as I
Just to
go.
clarify. Yeah.
That's good listening. Frank, let the record state Frank Corva is an excellent listener with excellent listening skills. Yeah, I wouldn't hear that until I edit back and go, God, you idiot. You minced your words. But no, that's the difference between the two. And if people are like, I hate, X or Twitter, which I hear all of the time. Everybody says, oh, it's a garbage dump. It's just nothing but vitriol. And it's like, okay, there's the solutions out there. You just have to start from zero. And a lot of people don't want to do that because they've been
That's
on,
the hard part.
20 years of Twitter. Now I want to go back into your past here before we run out of time. And another way that you were kind of built for this was a music career. And I don't know if you could pull up your prop, but I think there's a gold
Oh,
record
yeah.
on your past.
Yeah. I came up in like the Long Island and New York hardcore emo, whatever scene. So I used to work for a band called
Ooh,
Brand New,
look at that. I
which
remember them.
yeah, some bad stuff happened with the singer and his, I hope people don't just think about the band for that. They were a good band otherwise, and the rest of the guys were fine. But the stuff with the singer, very unfortunate, very sad, and, not
Yeah.
not good. And we won't get into that, though. We'll keep it positive
No.
here.
I played them somewhere on some station. I just don't remember when.
Okay,
There were a lot of
cool.
stations.
So yeah, I worked for independent record labels in the early 2000s. Actually, I started in 1999 while I was a senior in high school, working for like a local promoter. But I came up, so like I have tattoos on my arms, like the Bouncing Souls, a punk band
Nice.
from New Jersey.
Hardcore punk.
Yeah, stuff like that. It's like, but what the thing about that music, I think that gets sometimes misunderstood. I like the aesthetics of it, meaning I like the way, especially like melodic punk. So like no effects, strung out, like melodic, faster, heavier guitars, but melodic vocals. I really like that kind of stuff. But the thing about that world that really inspires me is the DIY ethos. So like you're not waiting for a
Mhm.
record label to come and sign you. Some people are, but otherwise put out your own record, record your own record, book your own shows, book your own tours. And the night someone described what Bitcoin was to me, it was January. It was the first or second week in January 2018. I didn't have the technical chops to sort of understand, okay, how does this work? It was just like, whoa, whoa, whoa. This is like a network that doesn't belong to the state and it's not private. And I'm like, okay, what's my frame of reference for this is at least in terms of like how people are educating each other about it, how they're developing on it, how they're spreading the word. And this is just like, I grew up in an era before the internet was really, really big. It was definitely a thing from like when I was in junior high on, but like AOL chat rooms and stuff like that. But we still
I
printed
remember
out
that.
flyers. Yeah, right. Yeah. We still printed out flyers for shows and we would hand them out at other shows. And like, that's how you got news about like what was happening. And then eventually they had like message boards for shows and stuff. But there was this whole network of like, nobody was in charge of like hardcore. It was almost like this. I've never said it like this. Punk rock or hardcore was like the protocol. And then everybody built on top of
Oh,
it, but nobody owned the protocol. I've never thought about, that's the first time I've ever said that. But
I love that.
I didn't realize, yeah, in the moment, that's what I was experiencing when someone explained. I've been through this before. And even the fact that it was so misunderstood, I was like, I've been through that before too. And I watched, so that band Brand New, there used to be a band called The Rookie Lot that nobody listening to this has probably ever heard of that. But
No.
that band played with like local hardcore bands at a bar, not much bigger than the size of the room that I'm in right now, maybe 3 times the size of the room that I'm in. So you're talking about with a bunch of other bands that no one ever knew, the singer Brand New, and all these bands ended up literally playing stadiums eventually. were just playing shows that they put on themselves, putting out songs that they recorded themselves. And so it all starts from there. And I knew that Bitcoin in 2018, I mean, I wasn't super early. 2018 was still 9 years into the protocol existing, but I knew. So we used to do a lot of playing at what were called VFW halls. This was like local, like a VFW hall is like where veterans of foreign wars meet and they
Uh-huh.
talk and they have events and socialize and stuff. So bars or VFW halls was where most of the hardcore scene happened. And when someone told me what Bitcoin was back then, I was like, okay, we're just at the VFW. At best, we're at like the New York City 500 seat venue room. We're not at, we're barely at like a bigger venue. We're nowhere near Madison Square Garden. We're nowhere near a stadium or like Queen playing to 500,000 people. We're like in the early days, and it's still sort of DIY and janky. And I think the really exciting part is if you feel like you missed that, you're getting to experience that right now with Nostr. Once Nostr is bigger and ubiquitous, you'll look at this as like the really cool days where like, oh, I used to like
Yeah.
see Heather's posts and listen to her podcast that she
This is
would
our
share on
punk rock
Nostr. Like,
days.
yeah, that's it. And there's something about that. So the word punk rock, it's off-putting to a lot of people because they think first of like the aesthetics of the music, the Sex Pistols, or the people that are
Mhm.
most associated with it, if people even think of those things anymore, where it's like, oh, that isn't that just like live fast, die young? It's like kind of, but also other things that were associated with like punk rock and hardcore was like very principled things. Whether you agree with them or not is up to you. But like veganism, like bands like Youth of Today in the 80s were promoting like don't drink, straight edge. I don't drink alcohol, but like don't drink, you know, live a healthy life. The antithesis of live fast, die young. Put out your own records, don't ask for permission. So when someone described Bitcoin to me, I was like, I've lived through this change before. I've seen
Got a point of
I've
reference.
seen bands go from like literally nobody caring about them to, you know, me being given a brand gold record for a band that I work with that in a million years when I started working with that band I never would have thought that would have happened. So I had
Uh-huh.
this frame of reference, and it was really exciting to me to be like I'm 43 now, so I learned about I was 35 at the time, and I was like, "Oh shit, I'm going to get to do this again." Like I loved those early days in the music
That's
industry.
awesome.
Like yeah, I was
That's a
so
fresh perspective. That's awesome.
yeah. And it was funny because the one thing I thought was completely over in my life I used to tour with bands when I was in the music business. I've toured the US, Europe, and I was just like, I guess I'll never really have a reason to travel like that again. And I think last year I traveled every other week for like a Bitcoin conference or to be in DC for Bitcoin. And it's also one of the reasons I don't drink and I eat mostly vegan when I'm in New York. When I travel, sometimes I break that rule a little now because one, it's a little bit too hard. And two, sometimes like if I'm in Japan and someone's serving sushi, like I'm going to try it. Like it's just, and I know that makes me kind of like a bad vegan in a way, but it's also like, it's like
Been
cultural
there.
experience. Yeah, that kind of
Yeah.
stuff.
I
Cultural
was vegan once.
experience.
Yeah. It didn't last for me,
So,
but there used to be a vegan cookbook by Issa Chandra Moskovitz called The Post Punk Kitchen.
okay,
You know, like being
cool.
vegan was
Yeah, yeah,
was
yeah.
an act of, it still is. My boss is vegan. Alex Gleason, he'll say I'm vegan, by the way, because he
Yep.
takes a lot of shit for being vegan. You know, and
Yeah,
because
as do
it's
I.
like, yeah, you know, and it's funny that we're all this space where we kind of have like these same inclinations of like music, veganism, software development, social work, journalism, activism. You know, there's a we have the longer I do this, the more I see these intersections kind of pop up, and I'm like, wow, we really do all have the same kind of kooky things in common. Like we were all just living our lives before
Totally.
Bitcoin came along and brought us all together.
Totally. The one thing I actually wish, I'm a little bit sad about this, to be honest. I wish more people that I knew from back then in the punk rock world, hardcore world, I wish more of them got Noster and all this stuff. Like, I'm actually kind of blown
Yeah,
away that more people didn't come over. But I think part of this is one of the big things that I think we're doing. And this is one of the reasons I'm also kind of leaving. I think a lot of people, even just being a White House correspondent, I think they were sort of like, oh, Frank's part of that, like America Bitcoin sort of thing. And I'm just like, I'm really not. Like, I'm not at all. But the bigger problem, I interviewed someone. The guy who runs the MIT, he ran the MIT Bitcoin Club for a while, and he does the Freedom Tech Summit. He organizes the Freedom Tech Summit they do at MIT, and he said, I said to him, I interviewed him for a podcast I was doing for Bitcoin Magazine. And I said, when the Nepal revolution happened, we saw a lot of stuff about people using BitChat and a little bit about people using Bitcoin because the traditional rails were shut down and communication was shut down. And I asked him, I was like, did you see like, are we being fed maybe something that feels a bit embellished? Like, were that many people really using this? And he's like, yeah, like what you're seeing on social media is really, really embellished. At best, like maybe 1% of the youth population downloaded BitChat and even less used Bitcoin. And I was like, okay, why? And he's like, well, a lot of the activists are on the political left and they see something like Bitcoin as just like this extension of capitalism.
Get that a lot. Yep.
That, yeah, and that is something that when I write, and I very specifically write these pieces that have to do a lot with inclusivity for Forbes, because I want my normie friends from high school or whatever to be like, wait, that's in Forbes. And I know Frank,
There's
Bitcoin's
some
being used for
credibility
that.
there.
Yeah. Like but I don't see another way that we get people to come over, because normies are still associating Bitcoin with like Trump token, Trump meme coin or something
Yeah,
like that.
because he tried to be the
So
crypto president, and they'd see the word crypto and they equate it to Bitcoin, and
that's
that
it.
is also a problem still too.
It's definitely a problem. And so I think I gave a talk on this. I was down in Colombia 2 weeks ago, and I gave a talk on, if you want to be a content creator, lowering your time preference. Don't do things to just get attention. Just be really consistent. Have a really honest message. Be proud of what you're putting out there.
Do the work.
Hack what you need to hack to get people to listen to it, because you could also fall into the trap of just putting out something that nobody listens to or sees. So there's a push and pull to this stuff. But I think you want to have a low time preference with it. Like, I highlighted what I said, like I wrote for a year and a half before a piece that I wrote went viral, and I was okay with that. Like before a lot of people picked up on like, oh, Frank's writing. I did a year and a half of writing where it went largely under the radar. And I knew that whenever I did something that felt like I was compromising my integrity, it felt kind of gross. And I didn't want to be recognized for something that felt gross, because now I think what happens is you get locked into that personality a little bit. There are a lot of like content creators that realize like, being like super MAGA or super this will get me more likes. Great, I'll just be that. The problem with that is like, you have to be that now. Like, even if it's just an act, I don't want to act like
I've
that.
seen
Like, I
that
don't
a
want to.
lot. I have
Yeah,
that suspicion about certain people that like they've locked themselves into that, and maybe they're not really that, but now they're stuck there. Once you see
it's
some of these people in real life, it becomes obvious to me. Maybe that's my theory though.
it's a real thing, and I made certain decisions when I was younger that I wasn't proud of, and I remember how bad they made me feel. And I do everything in my power now to say, okay, like, what do I have to do to sort of like, I have to pay bills, and if I'm going to create content and write for a living, like, okay, what's the trade-offs here? And there are times where I really come right up against that edge of like, this kind of feels gross to me. And those are the moments where I don't go past it, so I don't lose sleep over it. But I'm saying like that was enough. And I'll even tell my editor or whoever, like, I don't want to cover this, and I'm just going to write 3 more pieces now that feel much more like this is what I really want to say. It's again, it's constantly going up against that thing of like, we want to bring people above that 200 level frequency, right? We want to bring them to sort of understand that Bitcoin is banking the unbanked, and that censorship resistance is important, and that self-sovereignty is important, but it's not going to magically happen. So there's some level of sort of meeting people where they're at, and then trying to sort of like lead them to water, if you will.
That's the social worker in you, the teacher in you. You meet them where they're
Meet
at.
people where they're at. Totally. 100%. So
Before we
it's not
go,
easy. It's not easy.
it's not easy. We'll get there though. But before we run out of time, I wanted to mention that you have a connection to Black Vulcanite, which is a
Yeah.
great hip hop group that we love from Namibia. Tell the story.
Yeah. This is really funny. So I went to graduate school here in the city, and I was in a class. I was on international education development with a guy named Patrick Sam. Patrick came from Namibia. I think he was on a Fulbright scholarship, and he's a well-known personality there, and he's very connected to the art world and the music world and everything else in Namibia. And so one of Patrick's friends came over. We were at a party together, and he gave me this. He's like, "Yeah, you should listen to this hip hop outfit called Black Vulcanite." And this was like, I think this was like still a little bit before streaming. I remember he actually like emailed me the MP3s, and I put them on whatever player I had. And there was a 5-song EP, and I'm forgetting the name of it right now, and Oaken's going to get mad at me, but I remember listening to it over and over. And it's weird because like, as you get older, in high school, you're more impressionable. You get that thing and you just listen to it on repeat. Like, you found that thing
It's
that you love.
your
Black
religion,
Vulcanite.
Yeah.
Yeah. Black Vulcanite was one of those things like a little bit later in life where I was like, oh, I'm having like almost like a high school reaction to this. Like I really like this. There were 2 or 3 tracks on this EP, especially that were like I really was into. The rest of the EP was good too. I'm not, whatever, but it was a really good it was a really good release. And years later, I end up starting this podcast, and the first guest that I invite on is Oaken, and he says something about Black Vulcanite, and I'm like, oh yeah, I was like, I've heard of them before. He's like, I'm in Black Vulcanite. So I was listening to Oaken in like 12 and 13 when I first got this EP. He's like, yeah, I'm the guy who does like the spoken word and poetry and one of the rappers. And I'm like, I know you already. Not only that, but I went and lived in Namibia for a brief period of time. And when I told Oaken where I was hanging out and who I was hanging out with, we were probably at the same parties and music events together, but didn't know
Crazy.
it. And then we met through Bitcoin. So yeah, it was a really fun story. Shout out to Oaken, Easy Sats, keeping Namibia educated about Bitcoin. I've luckily got to meet him a few times
Awesome.
at different events around the world. And yeah, really fun connection. So yeah, it does bring us all together. But I think I don't want to sound too hippy dippy with this. It's like it is the frequency thing. I think the people who really, really get Bitcoin are existing on a bit of a higher frequency. I'm not trying to be like too whatever, but I do think that there's a level of enlightenment, a level of like, okay, I see what this is. And it's not just a asset that goes up and down and this, like there's something really kind of special here in terms of the way that this will empower humanity, people, everyday people. I think as more people maybe get over some of the stuff we just talked about, which was like, this is just a tool for capitalism or blah, blah, blah. Once that sort of disappears and Bitcoin just becomes a bit more normalized, ideally it kind of sucks people into this higher frequency vortex, and and as a result of things like Bitcoin, Nostr, etc., humanity becomes more enlightened. I'll leave it there. Yeah.
That's the perfect ending. And I'm going to play Black Vulcanite and some of your other favorite artists that we love, like Joe Martin, who has a new single coming out for Valentine's Day, and also Man Like Quex, another
Love it.
Bitcoin educator
Yeah.
in Africa. And any other artists that I should play at the end of the podcast?
Ainsley Costello is great. I know she's popular. We played a show
Yes.
together in Nashville, so shout out to Ainsley. What's his name from the format who started Wave Lake?
Sam
Means. Yeah.
Yes.
Shout out to Sam and what he's done. Yeah, Sam's great and what he's doing with the format again. I'm going to do one more story if you don't mind.
Go for it.
In 2005, I was working for Warner Music Group, and we started a division called East West, which has turned into something called Independent Label Group. And what we were doing at that time was signing independent labels and helping them do their distribution, because people were it was that era of like physical music kind of disappearing, but there wasn't really an answer on the digital streaming side yet. And I helped do the distribution for the Formats record, so I actually worked with Sam before I knew him in Bitcoin too.
No way.
So I met Sam. So him and the singer of the format came up to the lobby of the building. It was it's a building on 6th Avenue and 52nd Street in New York. It's no longer, but it's where Warner Brothers and Rolling Stone were. And he came up to the lobby of the building and played a song or two. So I saw Sam play like a little intimate performance in 2005.
Oh my
back
God.
then,
Young Sam.
before I met him again. Yeah, young Sam.
But yeah, Young Sam. Yeah, I got to go to the 25th anniversary format show here in Phoenix at the end of September. Awesome. It was biblically raining and flooding, and we all packed into the old Sun's Purple Palace.
Nice.
Veterans Memorial Coliseum. They filled the house. Can't play the format on Radio Detox, but I can play Means. Sam Means solo work I can play.
Cool. Well, that's it. But those are my shout outs. I love what Sam is doing. Ideally, we see, just continued slow and steady. I mean, I want to see parabolic growth, but slow and steady growth with Wave Lake. But at the very least, I'm just very glad that Wave Lake is an option for artists, and the artists that I have.
Exists.
Yeah. The ones I've gotten to check it out have been very much like, shit, like, whoa, this is cool. Like,
this is mind-blowing
here. So yeah.
Tech. I think you were one of the first people with your Forbes article to write about Ainsley, and I think you even mentioned Joe and Man Like Quex and maybe some others and Sam and Wave Lake, and I think you were one of the first people to cover it. That was like 2 years ago, because I remember we were so excited here in Phoenix, like, because we're all involved here. Our Nostr crew was very involved in all that, and we were like, oh my God, somebody from Forbes wrote about what we're doing and like what our artists are doing, and our artists have the they've got this boost that we need, and like that made our life, and
awesome.
and keep
I'm glad
it
to
up.
hear that.
Julie Costello wanted me to give you a shout out. Oh God, I still remember that article. That was so huge that he did that, and we very, very much appreciate that.
Pleasure's all mine, and I think breaking those stories, especially to more of a mainstream audience. It was actually funny. It was one of the women who I taught with at a public school in New York, a bit older than me, probably 10, 20 years older than me. She turned her son, who's a hip hop artist, onto Wave Lake because she saw me post on my Instagram that article and was like, "It's in Forbes, and you can do this with Bitcoin," and it did change the way she thought. So it did have an impact on the way people look at value for value, Nostr, Bitcoin, all that stuff, and ideally,
Awesome.
yeah, want to do more of that now that I'm free from the political stuff. I want to do more of
Good.
that when the opportunities arise.
Keep it up, Frank. Well, I've kept you long enough. I know
Thank
we both have to go on about our days, so I thank you for your time. We'll have to do this again, and once we
you. Yeah,
get the
please.
big reveal about what's next for Frank, we'll have you back on again soon. We won't be strangers. We'll talk again soon. Thank you, Frank.
Amen. Appreciate it. Thank you so much for having me on, Heather. Sincerely appreciate it. And thank you to everybody who listened. Much appreciated. Talk soon, everybody.